New York and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning. Laura Stiles is here. Rosenberg on assignment with ESPN, I believe. Is that what he's doing?
I think so, yeah.
Anyway, let's give it up for Derrick Johnson, the president and CEO of
NAACP,
the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Yeah. You know, I recently went to Ghana, and I went to the burial site of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right.
And, you know, a lot of people may or may not have done the studies on W.E.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP,
Correct.
who at a certain point felt so uncomfortable, let's just put it that way, in America, he left and felt like the only real way that black people will ever be equal is by uplifting Africa. Kwame Nkrumah also said that the true way, if we want to see equality, is through success of Africa.
That's correct.
And how do you feel about that, sir?
Absolutely agree. You know, Pan-Africanism is key. Du Bois was the father of Pan-Africanism. So whether it's Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, or Julius Nyerere, those are the stalwarts of the Pan-Africanist movement. But it's also important that they learned here in the United States. They studied here. And so you had individuals like Malcolm X and Ming and many others who also began to understand the connective tissue of the African diaspora.
That's right.
As we look at other communities, you know, they always relate back to their home country, whether it's Irish or Italian.
Talk to them.
We need to do the same.
German, all of it.
All of it.
Scandinavian nations.
That's correct.
Do you feel like it's happening? I mean, this year is the year of return. It's 400 years since the first slave ship left Africa, headed for the Americas, that version of slavery.
Correct.
1619. I went to Ghana last year. The president of Ghana and the nation of Ghana is celebrating the year of return and open arms, welcoming black people from all over the world.
Yeah. So NAACP, we are an NGO to United Nations, and we hosted African Dignitary Corps when they convened here in New York in September. And that's when the Minister of Tourism asked us to partner with them for the year to return, looking at a commemoration going from Jamestown, Virginia, back to Jamestown, Accra. We immediately agreed because we understand that the NAACP, our mission is both domestic and international. If the president's country can call our country shithole nations, it's time for the NAACP to stand up to support the countries of our origins. And that's why it's important. That's why we are participating with the country of Ghana to have this journey go back to Accra, go back to the door of no return, go back to the slave dungeon so we can retrace the journey of the African experience.
Well, and you know, they never thought we was going to be able to do this. That was never a part of the plan. The plan wasn't for black people to reconnect with their home. The plan wasn't, I don't even think, for us to survive. Matter of fact, any of it. I mean, those thoughts weren't even out there. So for us to be able to have this conversation, right, on a national platform and even, you know, having an organization that is sponsoring that on the U.S. side, you know, nations that are independent enough to, you know, make this a thing, you know, all over the continent of Africa. I think that's pretty powerful.
But simply, we are reconnecting to what we've always done here in America. You think about W. Du Bois, he went to Accra, but Maya Angelou also went over there with him. Malcolm X spent some time over there with him. Stokely Carmichael, he went to Guinea. You had Cortland Cox and many of the Black Panthers who went to Tanzania. This is something we've always done. We lost track in the connective tissues between what was taking place in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
That's right.
In the 70s, when the heroin hit our neighborhoods and crack hit 80s, we lost that connection. So we had a few people still waving that flag. It's time for us to reconnect in the same way.
The NAACP currently working on a number of issues to bring attention to the 2020 census.
Correct.
I tweeted with the U.S. Census. I think I talked about this on the air, right, Laura Stiles?
Yeah.
I exchanged a Twitter thing with the U.S. Census Bureau because I wanted to know why certain boxes exist, right? If we live in this post, racial world, why is the government still asking people to check a box? Mm-hmm. If we truly believe that, why y'all still asking for the box?
And people are very confused because the majority of people don't understand why they should participate or if they should participate. Is it working for them or against them?
Come to find out, the U.S. Census Bureau tweeted me and said, you can say whatever you want to say. You don't have to check a box. You can write anything you want on that form. And that then said to me, well, why are we even still asking? I know the answer, but I would like you to impart wisdom.
You know, oftentimes we recount history and we remember when there was a debate in Congress about blacks being counted 3/5 a person.
Okay.
That was not about us as individuals, as humans. That was about money. The census is about money. It determined the money flow from our federal coffers, our tax dollars, and where that will go. If we check the proper box, African Americans, and ensure that the governmental entities that represent us, that we pay taxes to on the local and state jurisdictions, that we get the money for bridges, roads, schools, and appropriate allocation. What is happening now is our undercount allow for another community's overcount, and they receive more in federal support to support their infrastructure, support their future.
So let's unpack that. At the federal level, tax dollars are collected. Those tax dollars are allocated to communities that are, is it based on race? Is it by zip code? Like when you say that money is being allocated, how is that decision made? Are people sitting around like, well, where are the African-American black organizations or black contracts or black businesses? Like how exactly? That's what I'm trying to understand.
So the census allow for a number of factors to be considered. Race is just one of them.
Okay.
And in that, when the allocation of federal funds are considered, many factors go into it. So the traffic count that's going down roads, that's a part of the census count, but that's also a part of the local Department of Transportation. When individuals talk about school finance, what kind of money do we need to put into Title I programs for low wealth kids? And is there a desperate impact based on race? Should we add another layer of resources? All of those factors come into play when you're talking about the allocation of federal resources. So if we're not properly counted for, then the resources don't come to our community. Right. That's why it's this deliberate intent to have an undercount. On top of that, it's a question of the reapportionment and redistricting process, the drawing of political boundaries that allow communities to elect candidates of their choice. I can draw a district and completely cut you out based on a number of factors if I have all the data. If I don't have the data, then I would create a scenario where you cannot take advantage of the political outcome of the election cycle, because if I draw the lines, I can freeze you out for the next 10 years. All of those things come into play.
I'm trying to follow, and I'm not really all the way there. So
all right, tell me where did I lose you, because I talk fast.
Well, no, it's not that you're talking fast. I'm thinking about it in terms of a person watching this and going, okay, redistricting, money allocation based on race. How does the racial component play into everything that you just said? Because I know, and I'm partially playing stupid, that by zip code, they know how the demographics of a particular zip code. They know where all the black people are. They know where the Spanish people are. They know where the white people are. They know where this income lives. They know where that income lives. A lot of this you could just Google and it's public information.
Right.
Is it that sort of thing?
So what you're Googling is actually the backup data. What you're Googling is census data.
Okay.
The lines that were drawn to determine zip code is based on census data. I flew into LaGuardia Airport. LaGuardia was the mayor of New York, and how they would draw the lines for the city of New York was based on communities. So to split the pie up, they said, okay, Italians, you get these 3 city council seats. Okay, blacks, you get a seat up in Harlem. But down in Hell's Kitchen, you Irish, you get a seat. That's how they used to do it. It had nothing to do with numbers, but that's how he split the power up so he can stay in control of the city coffers.
LaGuardia did that.
LaGuardia did that.
Okay.
And it was based on, okay, who I'm going to dole opportunities out so I can stay in power. Over time, people realized that was inequitable, because if you have one district with 1,000 people in it electing one person, and another district with 100 people in it, and they elect one person, the 100 people, their weight is greater than 1,000 people, and that weight determines how the city money is spent. So my 100 people can determine the impact of majority of the city. So you have to draw the lines in a way in which you have proportional representation, and that representation should take into consideration the ethnic makeup of any area, because after 1965, they would draw the district so black folks had no power. That's all in the
And
census
that was
data.
the urban renewal stuff.
That's no. That's national politics.
That's national
That's the
politics.
power play.
Okay.
I'm using New York because we're in New York. They did this across the country.
Got it.
It's about money. At the end of the day, who controls the money determines the power. And in a democracy, it's about votes. But in a capital system, it's about money. When democracy is strong, we hold capital in check. But when capital is unchecked and democracy weak, people get exploited.
And that's where we are today.
That's where we are today. That's where we are growing back to that place. That's why you have an inequitable tax system where the top 1% not paying their share. And as a result of that, school districts that where our kids go, they lack the funding to provide the quality that's necessary. This is a power game. And in that power game, data matter. Data matter because it direct money, and money is king.
And so if you don't participate in making sure the data is there, you won't have proper representation.
You start, if the starting line is at X point, we far behind the line, and people have a head start because it's more of us than them. However you define us and them, those with the resources and those who are being exploited for a cheap labor force.
And so when people fill out the census, should they be putting black? I usually take a Sharpie and I just write in black on it with a Sharpie. Does that still count?
It all depends, right? Who's doing the counting, what administration is in power. See, because the president appoint the head of Department of Commerce who oversee the census, and that's the fight now. Should we have this box, a citizenship box? The reason why that's on there is to put a chilling effect so certain people would not even fill the form out, so you don't have to account for them when you're doling up the federal resources.
Right, because what's going to happen is now that Puerto Rico was Commonwealth, they're technically citizens, right? Am I saying it right?
No, they're citizens.
They're citizens, but if they don't participate, they're not going to be counted.
Can't be counted.
And the same thing, obviously, then there's the whole Hispanic conversation, because you have black people who are also Hispanic and who don't necessarily check the box that they black. Yeah. They put down Hispanic.
In the census, don't they have Hispanic and they say not of African descent or not of like white descent?
Do they break it out that way?
Yes, they do.
It is like in the black community, light skin, dark skin. That's a game they're playing.
But it's really confusing.
Intentionally so, right?
Yeah.
I grew up in Detroit. To call somebody Hispanic was derogatory in my neighborhood. They're Latino, they're Cuban, whatever. They're never Hispanic. I went to law school in Texas. I was shocked when Latinos see themselves as Hispanics because you have some people who think they belong to Spain.
Yeah.
And some people who see themselves as Latin heritage. And then you have Afro-Latinos who understand that all of this is nothing but a social construct for power.
That's right.
And when we get into that space and understand that, then we can have a true power conversation. Everything else is a distraction. So for the Puerto Rican community who understand it, also Afro-Latino, we all understand that all this other stuff is nothing but a distraction.
But I don't think it's universally understood.
Absolutely not. Not only it's not. It's like the brown bag test in the black community. Some Negroes think they're a different type of Negro than the rest of us.
That's right.
Right. Same thing in the Latino community. Yep. But it's all a tool around a racial construct to maintain domination and control, to exploit people for cheap labor, and to cast others away.
So when the census comes, do people have anything to fear? Because obviously people don't fill out government forms because they are fearful. Maybe they got warrants. Maybe, they got somebody living in their house that doesn't have their paperwork right. Maybe, et cetera, et cetera. And I would say under this administration, people are more afraid than ever.
I think the biggest fear is not filling out the form, because if you don't fill out the form, we cannot properly account for the revenue flow to the communities where it needs to happen. Public housing is another example. That's all. Most of that is federal funds. Those federal funds are allocated based on census data. That census data determine the quality even of those federal housing complexes that so many of our communities rely on. So we must fill out the form if we want a more accountable system to represent our needs and interests and the future of our children.
Now, you spoke about power. You spoke about, obviously, the money aspect of it. Do you believe that right now what they're trying to, and by they I mean white supremacist-leaning, racist people who feel like this current administration represents their interests of maintaining a white-dominant society. Is all of this being put in play not only for confusion and fragmentation of, ethnic groups to not be able to unify their power and be more powerful, but to also unravel voting rights and everything else?
All of those things are absolutely to go. So race is a social construct. In a democracy, those who have the votes at the table control the public policy and the resources. But if your tribe begin to shrink, you seek ways to create more tribalism so you can stay in power. That's what's happening.
More fragmentation.
More fragmentation or tribalism. And so you begin to cater towards a racial narrative that engenders fear for one group and to try to create more otherness of another group so you can stay in power.
So you have, the Muslim ban. You have, which is a sensitive issue. And Islam being characterized as a dangerous thing. Mm-hmm. You have, obviously, the black man, which has been characterized as a dangerous thing in the society forever. You have the abortion issue, which obviously becomes a religion issue, and they know that many blacks and Latinos, when it comes down to that abortion issue, just lean conservative because of religion.
That's right.
So now they make it a hot topic, and people start to line up based on that topic.
Correct.
And even gay rights too.
All
Same
of
thing.
it, right?
Gay rights,
So
yeah.
the most powerful tools in the arsenal of politics is the tool of race and religion. You pull a moral argument out your back pocket, you are guaranteed to generate a level of energy from targeted communities, whether you need that targeted community to do something or you need that targeted community to prevent something from happening. You raise the race question, you generate a level of energy to get your targeted community to do something or stop something. It's nothing but a tool to maintain power, domination, and control. So when they pull these things out their back pocket, abortion, same-sex marriage, fear of the black man, the whole xenophobia stuff, Islam. All of these things are either moral arguments or racialized arguments, but tools for a political outcome. And as a result of what's taking place in the change in demographics, they are running out of votes. They're running out of people to deem white. Because, many of the folks we see as white today, they were not considered white in 1930.
They weren't.
And they're running out of people to deem white. It's hard for them to call us white now, right?
That's right.
And so the only way they can do is try to increase their turnout by scaring the hell out of folks to go act based on moral reactions or fear based on racialized statements.
My mom's Jewish. My mom would always say Jews are only white when it's convenient for white supremacists.
That's correct.
Because they definitely wasn't, considered white.
Jews didn't start being considered white until after 1950. Irish wasn't considered white until about the mid-40s. A whole slew of individuals.
Now, when you look up white in the Caucasian or white, they include North Africans. They include
some Moroccans
Egyptians, Moroccans.
all crazy stuff, right? Because they got to increase it. The global reality is there are fewer individuals of European descent than everything else. But the tricky thing about the whiteness, only individuals who were WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. So Northern Irelanders, because they were Catholic, were not considered white. It's a social construct around power, domination, and control. And so we can't feed into that narrative. We got to keep our eye on, okay, what's the power play here, and how do we leverage our power so our communities can receive all the benefits that's entitled to any human being.
The theory, another theory that I have, which is more about white supremacy. Y'all know how I am. The idea that this abortion issue is about white reproduction, and the largest group the group that gets the most abortions in the nation are white women. A, math, because there's just more white women, but also B, you have a large educated individuals tend to not want to have as many babies as uneducated individuals. And is this abortion issue playing on those things also, where they want white women to not be able to have abortions to raise the population rates?
Well, there are agendas and there are sub-agendas and there are sub-agendas, right? On the front end, we know is about energizing a base to get out to vote. Think about the current political climate. We're talking about a president who is an unindicted conspirator to foreign interference in our election. A report that came out by a special counsel that identifies specific incidents in which he in fact obstructed justice and colluded. They need a distraction. Guess what the good distraction is? The abortion conversation.
That's right.
Because they need their base to be thinking and talking about something else and take their eyes off of the reality that this president has colluded with a foreign nation. Now, can you imagine in the 1950s and 60s when they were trying to label everybody a communist? Mm-hmm. This is the same reality here. So the abortion conversation now, it's not about anything other than we need a big issue to distract the attention of our base. And their base are white men and women who are in fear of a country where more communities of colors can share in the power play.
And the just the number of black and brown people is increasing.
Demographic is not destiny, but it's damn sure gonna happen.
Right.
And so there are more and more communities that are growing in population because the global reality is there are more communities that are diverse in terms of population. It's just the natural reality of where we are in this country
and in the world.
In the world, that's what I'm talking. In the world, and so there would be fewer and fewer just completely white countries. However you define whiteness, it is a human reality that it is a diverse globe.
When They See Us, have you seen this movie, Ava DuVernay's, on Netflix, When They See Us, about the Central Park Five? Have you had time for that?
I've seen parts of it. I grew up during that time. In 1986, I was a senior in high school. I remember the onslaught of news stories about the Central Park Five. I recall my family, people in the neighborhood telling us there are certain areas you don't go to because this here can create a risk for all of us. In Detroit, Dearborn was like the Central Park, the white area that you didn't go to.
Dearborn, Michigan.
That's right. It's not that anymore. So I remember that reality. I recall when then failed businessman Trump took out the full-page ad in the New York Times. All the racialized games. They used that case to spread across the country to justify the beginning of the mass incarceration movement that took hold in the late 80s and 90s. Mm-hmm. That's the game of the power of images and bad narrative. So I have not seen it, but I live that reality.
You are a West Point grad, or not? You're not a West Point grad, but the largest graduation of black women out of West Point recently just happened. Did you happen to see that?
It was a beautiful thing. We oftentimes talk from a deficit mindset about what we have not done and what we have not accomplished. That's one of those surpluses. That's as a result of many years of fighting to open up doors of opportunities, not only for African Americans, but for women. And how nice it is to see that African American women is the benefactor of something of that significance.
Before we let you up out of here, back to Trump, do you believe that he should be impeached?
Absolutely. Now, the timing of that becomes the question.
Okay.
How we manage that becomes the question. Because if impeachment is in the House. They have the votes and authority to impeach him today. Removal of the office from office is in the Senate. The question is, if they impeach and they go to the Senate, they don't have the vote to remove, they can control the narrative as if he was found not guilty.
He's a martyr now.
That's
now
right.
He's martyred.
So we have to manage the reality. Is he guilty? I believe so. Has he committed treason? A strong case could be made for that.
And obstruction of justice.
Obstruction of justice. I mean, if you and I pulled over by a police officer and we don't comply with a slight thing that said we're interfering with it, I mean, yes, but the question is, the political reality is they can impeach today, but when they get to the Senate, will he be removed? If he's not removed, how would they spin that narrative? No different than how Barr spins the narrative on a report where, in fact, he was found to have committed these things, but yet he spent the narrative. And so for 3 weeks, we were talking about he's exonerated, and then when the report came public, we realized, no, he wasn't. So we have to be able to manage the outcome, the ultimate outcome, in a way in which we can get the outcome that we desire. And what we desire is him being out of office, because it is a risk to all of us as African Americans and Latino Americans and for the American public in general.
In the handling of Donald Trump currently, how much does it jeopardize the integrity of that office?
Oh, I mean, he's completely undermined the integrity of that office. I mean, when racial hatred and intolerance is germinating from the White House, his lack of desire to embrace intelligence has undermined the office. Their lack of understanding of the role of government and how it should play out, even for conservatives, has undermined that office. His very existence has undermined that office.
Now, are you a fan of any of the current presidential candidates of the 20? What number we at, Laura?
I think you had like 23, 24.
Are you a fan of any of them at this point?
We're nonpartisan, right? And I'm friends to all, committed to none, and I was with the winner. Whoever can take him out of office, that's who I'm with, because we need to remove him from office.
Now, you said the NAACP is nonpartisan, but you want him removed from office. Is this a scenario where the organization feels as if this candidate, just so happens to be a Republican, has made it for people of color so uncomfortable that the organization has to now say, we cannot align with you?
Political parties is nothing more than vehicles for agendas. We have an agenda. Our agenda has not changed. Individuals' alignment with political parties have changed over time. So there were times where majority of African Americans, we were Republicans.
That's right.
Because that was the place we could rest. We switched up. We've gone back and forth. We can't get caught up in the label of a political party unless those labels carry our agenda. NAACP role is to define the agenda. We have 2,200 units across the country in 47 states. We convene once a year with delegates who represent all 47 of those states, and they put forth a policy agenda that really line up with our priorities. That's my concern. That what is the black agenda, if there is such a thing, and how would that line up with any political party's agenda? That's the real question that we have to confront.
Is there work to define a black agenda? I've seen talk.
I don't think black folks, we're not a monolith.
That's right.
So how public policy considerations should be handled in North Carolina is completely different than how they should be considered in Utah.
Yeah.
So we have to recognize that, but it is the wisdom of the collective whole to allow us to debate within our community and measure opportunities, because none of us have the complete solution. All of us should have a voice in the process.
But we can all agree that currently the regime in the White House is a threat to people of color.
We can agree within the black community. We can agree with black community and some of the Irish community and the Jewish community. We all see what the issue is.
What do you think about the whole Blexit movement?
Movements should be defined on what's the true intent, motivation, and the outcome being desired. I believe in a democracy. Right? And because I believe in a democracy, my goal is how do we increase the number of people who can add their voice to the public policy considerations at the table. So all these offshoot movements, they find if that's where people want to put their energy. So I have no negative on that, but what's the motivation behind it? Who's funding it? What outcomes are they pursuing? Is the outcome being pursued something that's going to create a brighter future for our young people, make sure that our elderlies are protected and the rights of the disadvantaged is intact? That's what I care about.
You work down in Mississippi, yes?
Absolutely. I still live there, Jackson, Mississippi. That's right.
Amazing. The mayor's amazing.
I was my partner. His father was my mentor. Lived 4 houses down. We all from Detroit originally.
Got it.
Yeah.
Tell me about Jackson, Mississippi, which feels like not just a growing black utopia, right? But also just the way what I'm reading, black entrepreneurialism, the support for black businesses, and everything going on, and the attraction of not only people who want to buy houses and start families, but intellectuals and all of it going on in Jackson, Mississippi.
Through the 60s and 70s, as black folks began, it was coming towards the end of the black exodus from the South coming north and looking for jobs. We thought Harlem was the black utopia. We thought, south side of Chicago was the black utopia. We thought Detroit, Brown Bottom was going to be black utopia. So we need not to get caught up in the lure of the concept, but we need to start digging deep. What does it mean to have a black utopia? The most frustrating thing for me to see is when I go on U Street in D.C. or go in Harlem and realize that we don't control the property and the land anymore. That's what needs to happen in Jackson. That's part of the work. Chokwe Lumumba Sr., he moved from Detroit to New York, represented the Briggs robbery case, won that case, and moved to Jackson because a group of them under the banner of Republican New Africa felt that we need to claim a stake in the Black Belt. And that Black Belt runs from Texas all the way to North Carolina and begin to invest and purchase land. That's where we are. But that's the reality wherever we are. So wherever we live as a community, that should be the Black utopia. There's no one place. It's all across the country. It's where Black folks live. It's where Afro-Latinos live. It's where we define that self-determination should be the way to go, and no one else outside of our community should be controlling us.
Well, and I guess the idea of a Black utopia is really based on a place where the politicians, the law enforcement, the business owners aren't not necessarily Black, but have Black interests and have interests in upliftment and, interest in teaching and sharing. And, I think that's more the idea.
It's idea, but sometimes the ideal is fleeting because Black on Black crime is still real. Mm-hmm. Black on Black self-hate is still real. Mm-hmm. And Black on Black bad policy is still real. Mm-hmm. So it's still a struggle. So when you get there, like you get anywhere, you're still dealing with the reality of human behavior.
That's right.
Across racial line.
And so is what's taking place in Jackson, is it about land ownership? Is that, who owns the land in Jackson, Mississippi?
So, what's happening in Jackson is what has happened in many areas. And it just didn't happen the last 4 years when Antar got in office. It's part of a continuum of a movement. That movement...
Who's Antar?
Oh, the mayor. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
The mayor, the movement, right? You think about...
That's Chokwe's son.
That's Chokwe.
Yeah.
So Chokwe Sr., we call him Chokwe.
Chokwe, yeah.
Son is Antar.
Got it.
Right?
Got it.
But in the 60s, much of the civil rights movement, we talk about this egocentric personality, Martin Luther King, and we don't highlight the community-centric approaches that created some successes. So in Jackson and Mississippi, we were able to get political control. So where you had a Ferguson outcome and individuals were exonerated, in Jackson, when we had a similar situation, everybody was convicted because they had to go in front of a Black federal judge. They were arrested by a Black police chief. The head of the FBI at the time was an African-American. The sheriff of the county at that time was African-American. The DA was African-American. The U.S. Marshal that walked them into the federal court was African-American. The U.S. Attorney was African-American. And the warden of the jail that they're sitting in, the federal jail, is African-American. That comes over time and struggle. And when you have victories, you also have to protect it because they can take it back. Mm-hmm. What's happening in Jackson is what should be happening everywhere. In this political environment, we must take what we are deserved, but we got to protect everything that we have. And every wrong on this fight, there are people trying to take it. The Harlem political machine was the most baddest machine in the country. Mm-hmm. The question is, did we do what was necessary to protect it, to grow it, and to expand it?
And because you are, we're closer to it, where were the individuals that were working with Clayton Powell, under Clayton Powell? Where were, who is after Charlie Rangel? Who's running the Harlem Chamber of Commerce? Shout to them, by the way. Do you stay involved in these as an NAACP with this?
But that's a local question I need to ask. What happened in Jackson? I'm sitting here because I'm a part of a continuum that come out of Mississippi and that whole political network. And even today, we have a leadership institute where we train people to come and replenish the Progressive Black Network and to replenish the Progressive Network. That's a question that we have to ask around the question. What is the Black Utopia? Oakland, California, another one.
Yep,
before we develop an area, we got to own it.
That's right.
So we had some good mayors doing development, but we didn't own it. And now Oakland is one of those Black utopias that's slowly shrinking.
Yep.
And that's the reality we're seeing across the country.
And is this, in your experience, tied to bank loans and businesses and
everything,
all of that?
Everything. Think about New Deal policy. We have FHA loans, but if you lead a decision to the local bankers and they ice us out, then we can't get the mortgages. When you have a Social Security program put in place and they have two exceptions, everyone qualified for Social Security except domestic workers and agricultural workers, and 80% of the Black folks was domestic workers or ag workers, then we have two generations of individuals without any safety net, therefore we couldn't generate the wealth. All of these things are public policy realities that we need to stay attuned to, not get caught up in the flashy movements of the moment, and understand the long game that we're playing.
Well, I don't know if these conversations are happening on a mainstream level where people can because it's hard to follow all of this for the layman, right? It's very hard. Like, we're dealing with recreational marijuana here in the state of New York right now, and the bill that's up is 50% of revenue, taxed revenue that comes from recreational marijuana will go to the communities most affected from the drug policies of the past.
Like the lottery money, right?
Right, but we don't know what communities, what schools, none of that is defined.
And who's managing this and who's on the board, and and so even just this morning we were on the air saying, listen, we got to pay attention.
Right. So that's where the fight is. It's in the details of the public policies that's been considered, because the right word placement can determine whether or not the money go where it needs to or not. May go to communities most affected, or shall go to communities. That one word makes a big difference. May is discretionary. Shall is a requirement.
That's right.
And so that's where the game is. It's in the nuances of the victories, not the victory.
Derrick Johnson's his name, man. The current president and CEO of the NAACP since 2017. Any words you want to leave us with before you get up out of here? Because I know, you came up here, you wanted to have these conversations. We have them all the time, and we're very honored to have you today.
But, I look forward to come back some more, but we invite you and your audience to come with us to Ghana.
Yeah. I'm back in Ghana December 26th.
August 18th, we're taking a delegation. You can go on our website, naacp.org, to sign up.
Now, is that a part of PanAfest, or is that just because I know they have a big festival going on around?
So it is part of the year return.
Got it.
Right? It is during the period in which the government will be recognizing the year return. So NAACP, we are the partner to bring people back.
Got it.
To recognize the 400th year of the transatlantic slave trade.
August 18th.
August 18th through the 25th. If you want to stay 3 additional days to participate in the Ashanti ritual of the Golden Stoop, August 18th through the 28th. We invite you and others to join the NAACP.
Yeah. And so, is this something where people are signing up through the NAACP?
It is our trip. Yeah. So naacp.org.
Okay.
There's a link. The Jamestown. Click on there. It gives you all information how you can sign up. The whole deal.
That's dope, man. Derrick Johnson, give it up for him one time. I might make that trip. I might have to make 2. Shawnee, you going right?
Yeah.
Wait, when are you going?
For the PanAfest.
That's beginning of August.
Yeah, that's early August.
Yeah.
PanAfest early August.
Okay. Listen, just get there. How about that?
That's right. Get there.
Get there. Everybody need to get there. Thank you so much today.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Right.